and with me, as always, fellow Atlanta film critic Jason Evans. Jason, welcome to this stormy evening as we are recording right now here in
Hold
Atlanta.
on. I have to get ready. I have to hold on, get my gear on.
Oh my
Here we go.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
Little-
Yeah. So if you haven't been able to tell by the little bit of weather intro and that ridiculous hat you have on right now, we're talking about Twisters this
Yep.
week, the sequel, remake, reimagining, reboot,
Hang on.
whatever you want to
All
call it,
stop all that.
to
It's not a sequel. It's in the same universe. It's the same kind of story. It's not a sequel. It's not a remake. It's not a reimagining. It's just another story about people chasing tornadoes.
yes, yes. I have to imagine that this was maybe just a script that they had like floating in the Amblin offices, and they were probably just like, I don't know, can we just call it Twisters? Um, Before we get into that though, I do want to ask you about the first Twister that came out in, which it feels weird to like say it like it was an actual like event, but the 1996 film that this is sort of in lineage of, that starred Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton, among many others. I revisited it recently. I'm curious what your relationship is to it,
By the
because
way, you said stars many others. Philip Seymour Hoffman
we
steals the movie.
it was
It's
just like we
amazing.
don't have time to go. Because honestly, when I rewatched it, I haven't seen it since. This was like one of those movies that was like, I think for people of my generation, your family had like 5 VHSs growing up, and like you just ran all of those. And Twister was one of the ones in my family that
Yeah.
we just like ran into the ground. But rewatching it, yeah, it was exciting seeing that there's like such a great cast of people in it, like Carrie Ulrich, uh, Philip Seymour Hoffman that you mentioned. I mean, we could just kind of go on and on. It's like a pretty
We're
impressive cast.
People are not listening to this right now to have us talk about the 1996 film, which is incredibly beloved, holds a special place in my heart. It is absolutely a great adventure film. It sort of comes on the cusp of, we're starting to do digital effects, we're starting to do computer stuff, and old school natural effects. Like Jan de Bont, the director of that film, apparently in lots of the scenes was like physically throwing water and tree limbs and dirt and stuff at his actors to simulate what it was like, to be assaulted by a tornado. And like people on the set were like furious at him because he was constantly throwing stuff at people. There's a whole thing about that, but we're not here for that. Let's get to the
Yes.
present day one.
So now we have Twisters, which is not directed by Jan de Bont.
No,
Put a pin in that. It's directed by Lee Isaac Chung, who made this very small movie called Minari that came out during the pandemic. That
won all the awards, big
yes,
award contender. But like, can I just ask right off the bat, could there be two more polar opposite films than
no,
Minari and
though
Twisters?
two movies that are about the heartland of this country in a weird
Sure, I
way.
guess.
But yes, and in the leads of the Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt, stand-ins, we have Daisy Edgar Jones and Glenn Powell. I'm curious. Let's just get into it right away. What did you think of this disaster movie of that's been plopped right in the middle of summer?
So the first thing I'll say is, I mean, I know a lot of people are sort of marketing this, feeling like this was a Glenn Powell movie. I think it was a Daisy Edgar Jones film. She is absolutely the main character. She's in virtually every scene. Everything revolves around her character. Frankly, Glenn Powell doesn't even show up till about 30 minutes in the film, and like his character doesn't undergo very much of a change. Like her character is the one that goes through a lot of pathos and has things happen to her, and she's the one who has to come to grips with her past. And I'm not going to get into the plot too much. He's basically the same thing the whole way through. Now
Yeah.
he's great. Glenn Powell is a ton of fun. I am in for any movie that he's in. But to me, this is an introduction for a lot of people to Daisy Edgar Jones, she hasn't done a lot of big name stuff. Like she did Where the Crawdads Sing.
Which was a hit, and I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of it's interesting. This is sort of the year of, can the two stars of the Hulu series Normal People can they be movie stars, with her
Yeah.
and Paul Mescal being the lead of the Gladiator sequel. I'm curious, what did you think of her as in this sort of like movie star introduction version of her as a star? Do you feel like she is a one of the movie stars of her generation, or that maybe gets kind of a little bit lost in sort of this big loud movie.
I hate to say it, but no.
Yeah,
I thought that look, this film is fine. It's the classic one of the yeah, it's fine. It's a movie that needs to be seen on a big screen. We saw it in a theater that had Dolby speakers all along the walls, and my
right.
seat was like rattling. Like, I mean,
Really
like,
sort of shaking the theater in several parts.
yeah. I mean, look, it's a classic special effects blockbuster that has that that spends most of its time and most of your energy as the audience on the sweeping, unbelievable effects of the tornadoes, the sound design, and all that other kind of stuff. And frankly, script, acting, all those things, let's put them to the side a little bit because we're primarily concerned with putting people in the middle of tornadoes. That's cool. That's fine. It's not particularly lasting to me. I didn't think that Daisy Edgar Jones popped off the screen. I mean, even like I said, Glenn Powell doesn't come in till midway through. The film picks up in energy so much the moment
It
he's there.
really does feel like he's almost bulldozing everyone else off the screen in terms of just like comes in with so much energy. Almost, it
Well,
just
and the
sort of
people
feels like
he has a group of like 4 or 5 people around him who also have that same energy. It's like
right.
them versus everyone else in the movie, and it's very strange.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very mixed on this. I was greatly looking forward to it, as you were. I think I'm just gonna spitball some things that have just been sort of like meditating in my mind since we
Go for it.
saw it last night. I think I just sort of walked out feeling like I understand a little bit more the sort of weird checklist of things that just have to be in sort of a big blockbuster movie like this that weren't necessarily there in the mid 90s when the first Twister came out. Of you and I were talking afterwards. The first Twister is a pretty lean movie that just sort of throws you right into like that there's very little backstory on these people. There's a little bit of a history that you get into with like Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt, like had a thing in
It's
the
sort of
past.
introduced on the fly. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
It's mainly just sort of like you're on the road with these people and you're just sort of going from one set piece to the next, and the movie is sort of just playing off of the different personalities in this group of people. But this movie, I feel like we have to add all of this extra stuff of like we have to give the Daisy Edgar Jones character this tragic backstory that she has to overcome.
Well, now
And
hang
we
on. Remember in the original, Helen Hunt has a at least somewhat similar backstory.
I
It's what
guess,
these characters have to go through, you know?
but it doesn't feel like that sort of like lingers over the movie as much as like it does here, or even having to sort of there's this whole thing with like Glenn Powell's team are basically like YouTubers, and so this movie is trying to, I think, do a lot of sort of nods to that culture and that sort of media space, for lack of a better word, that I don't know, maybe it's an age thing, but I'm just at this point now in my movie going experience where like I haven't quite felt that the movies have sort of been able to capture kind of like the YouTuber podcaster sphere in the world and do it in a way that feels believable. And here it just sort of felt like, in the middle of all these like great tornado set pieces, you get kind of like these weird cutaways to like iPhone footage of like Glenn Powell or someone else being like, "Yo, yo, yo, we're out here. We're in the tornado." And like it throws off the rhythm a little bit, I think, of the set pieces. And I actually feel like, the first Twister I would not say is a great movie, but I think that movie has
It's a
much.
really fun movie.
It's a fun movie, but there's also, I think, because Jan de Bont was like a cinematographer on movies like, certainly Die Hard, a lot of those like late 80s, early 90s action movies. He made Speed, like really understands how to deliver these big set pieces with a level of kind of like awe that takes your breath away, even when the special effects in the original Twister have aged terribly. Like you still feel kind of like the size of these big tornadoes that are sort of happening. It's sort of like the sweeping landscape. And maybe it's because Lee Isaac Chung hasn't like made a movie of this size before, but I didn't quite get that same level of like spectacle for as much better as this movie is in terms of the visual effects. It felt like a weirdly smaller movie in a way. I don't know. Did you get that
Well,
feeling a little bit?
I mean, I don't know how to put it quite that way, but I will say something about the special effects that bugged me. And they're great, but I felt like we were inside the tornadoes a lot, and we didn't get much of a sense from them of the outside of stepping back a bit, which is one of the things I loved about the first film. The first film, all the time you pull away and you sort of see the tornado coming toward you and stuff like that. I didn't feel like we got as much of that in this one. The original film had this great sense of scale, of understanding of where things were in relation to each other, and
And
some of that
treating
is
the
lost in
tornado
this film.
like a monster, like a dinosaur in Jurassic Park, like this
Yeah,
just luminous thing that you were scared of, where that you don't quite get in this movie.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And again, it was partially that like I didn't have a great sense all the time of okay, where other than it's coming. Like, what are the confines of where I am and what's going to happen if it comes here? Like, again, I just felt like I was missing a little bit of that. And then the other thing I wanted to say about this is that I noticed that the script was by Mark Smith, who famously did The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio. He also did a film with George Clooney called The Midnight Sky. And
Ooh.
the thing that immediately struck me, both those films are movies with very little dialogue. It's just
Mm-mm.
like a character going through something, but they don't speak a lot. They don't have a lot of people to speak to. And to me, the script was the biggest problem in this film. There are portions of the movie that sort of make no sense. When you think about it more and more, you're like, wait, what are the motivations and what's
There
happening here?
there's a lot
Um,
of, maybe I wasn't quite like being clear about it earlier, but there is like a lot more plot in this movie than you would imagine with like,
Yeah. But it's not plot that you connect to or care about
no.
or understand. And I never connected with any of the characters the way I did with Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt in the original. A lot of this felt color by numbers, in terms of,
Yeah.
okay, we need to do this now and then this now. And oh, we're going to go visit this person. And it was all very predictable and very much, went along the path that we expect from a blockbuster like this. And that's kind of disappointing. Like, stretch a little bit, man, do something a little bit different.
Yeah,
And and
I
and to me, that I was the script to me is the biggest problem with the film. Again, it's not. I don't think it's a bad film.
no.
Again, fun. I think people will have a nice time in it, and the effects are great. And see it someplace where your seat rattles from the sound. But is this a movie that we're gonna be talking about in 20 years the way we still talk about Twisters? No way.
Yeah, you bringing up the script, I think, really connects to sort of what I was sort of saying of like you can feel that a lot of the sort of like needless things that are sort of being added on here of like people have to have tragic backstories. We have to like have some sort, we have to kind of nod towards climate change but not be explicit about it because, we don't want to like make the movie too political. You
They
just
have to
have
have good guy storm chasers and bad guy storm
right,
chasers.
you just have all of this extra stuff where I feel like that first movie was just willing to sort of trust in the audience and trust in the movie's own sense of fun of like you're going to just enjoy being with these people and being out on the road and being caught up in the ride in this. And I sort of remarked to you as we were walking out like, do we know how to have fun anymore? And part of that was just sort of like I felt like there was a lot of just extra stuff in this movie that felt like studio notes saying like, well, people aren't going to be able to connect to this character if this doesn't happen to them, or we need to have all this other conflict going on. And I don't think you need that. I almost wish that, you know, the people who made this movie could just trust in like we have some very charismatic people in our cast. Just let the audience enjoy the ride, and sometimes that is enough, and sometimes is a more rewarding experience.
Hey, can I ask something? Do you feel like this film could have used more humor?
That's an interesting question considering Glenn Powell is, I feel like, trying to
Right. Well,
throw off
he's
a
playing
lot of
comedy almost the whole
zingers.
time.
And I never thought I would say this, but I almost, it's almost relegating all the humor to Glenn Powell in a way that like that character almost got on my nerves a little bit towards the end because the movie is just so relying on like, dude, we just need like everything else needs to be aggressively unfun, so we need you to be the person that is just like nonstop zingers and quips and stuff to the point where like I feel like it doesn't help that character when then I get to the end of the movie. I'm like, I don't really care what happens to Glenn Powell or his relationship with Daisy Edgar Jones because he just feels like the avatar for us of the audience to just point out and be like, this is ridiculous or that's ridiculous. He doesn't feel like a character to me.
Yeah, I mean he's there to look great, which he does, and
Really rocking that cowboy hat.
yeah, and to crack some quips and some jokes and give a little bit of sexual tension, I guess you'd call it, attraction, something like that. But he doesn't provide a lot else to the plot. It's a pity. He was so great in Hitman, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's not his fault.
No,
This is just
no.
it's not a particularly well written part. It doesn't it's incongruous with a lot of else of what's going on in the movie. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my two takeaways from Daisy Edgar Jones and him. I think he is undeniably a movie star, but just maybe
She's not.
could use, or like I feel like I've seen her be really good in other stuff, but maybe this kind of big summer blockbuster isn't necessarily the role where she's going to. She's such a like interior actor that I feel like you need someone who's a little bit more extroverted as a performer to really like carry a movie like this.
She probably spends an hour and 50 minutes, like the first 10 minutes, the final 5 minutes, and everything in between. I don't think she had a smile on her face the entire time.
Well, Jason, that about wraps us up for this week. Next week we'll be talking about another hotly anticipated movie of the summer. We're
Deadpool, baby. It's
Deadpool
time
and
for Deadpool and
Wolverine.
Wolverine.
We'll get to explore my uncomfortable relationship with Ryan Reynolds. We'll get to talk about whether or not the MCU truly can be saved, and whether it was a good idea to leave resurrect Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, or just let him do Broadway.
I think it's gonna be a great film. I'm gonna go ahead and predict that right now.
I,
It's
I
gonna be
I hope so. I need something, Jason. It's been kind of like a meh movie summer since we saw Furiosa, and I need something to like provoke me and get me excited. So, but until that episode comes out, hey, we'll see you all at the movies.